Welcome to the Under 8 Podcast, a daily college basketball show brought to you every weekday in under 8 minutes. At the time of recording, it is Monday, January 22nd, 10:47 p.m. My name is Josh Mullenix. On today's pod, new AP polls and Monday night hoops. It's all right now on the Under 8 Podcast. New AP poll, and there were a couple top 5 teams on the women's side that are probably going to see their rankings impacted on the very first night of this new AP poll. A couple top 5 teams in trouble. A couple top 5 teams tested, one of them ultimately in trouble. Starting with number 16 Utah 94, number 2 UCLA 81. The entire game was close. Utah was in control going into the fourth quarter. Then UCLA won the fourth quarter by 9, and then Utah won the overtime by 13. And that's where you get a relatively lopsided score, considering we went to overtime.
Yeah, the overtime was not competitive. Hence the 13-point ultimate win. Biggest upset or biggest win from a opponent ranking standpoint in Utah history. So congratulations to the Utes. They just also blew the doors off USC. So it's going pretty well right now. Mm-hmm. And they did this in a game where Alyssa Peely, who averages 22.7 points and shoots 63% from the field, had 16 points on 4 of 15 shooting. But that's okay when you're 13 of 28 from 3 and you out-rebound a team that doesn't get out-rebounded. And that's ultimately what the difference in this game was. Very, very balanced, kind of all over the place attack from Utah. Like I said, your star player doesn't have a good game. This team is still good enough to go take down the number 2 team in the country. And signature moment for the program. Really, really cool for Utah. And the other part of this, just from a Pac-12 standpoint, Colorado and Stanford, we're going to talk about them a little bit later, but they're 1.5 games up on everybody. You've got USC, obviously UCLA in there. Utah's playing really well. This is a loaded conference on the women's side, but you've got 2 clear frontrunners right now with the way everything played out these past few days.
UCLA, 42% from the field, just 5 of 18 from the 3-point line. The Utes made 13 of their 28 3-pointers. That seems pretty functional, and missed just 1 of their 24 free throws. You add it all up, you get 94 points and a 13-point win over number 2 UCLA. In the Big 12, number 4 Kansas State 58, number 13 Baylor 55. The Bears scored 19 points in the second half, 8 in the third quarter, 8 in the fourth quarter. They went into halftime with a 9-point lead. Were not able to hang on to it. Number 4 Kansas State moves to 19-1 on the season with a 3-point win in Waco.
Yeah, Kansas State was in trouble. Ultimately, they survived. That was not a pretty first half. Baylor very much looked like the better team. It looked like Kansas State was playing without Aoka Lee because they were. And then all of a sudden in the second half, they figured some things out defensively. Baylor's offense fell apart. Then Baylor kind of rallied and had a couple good offensive possessions. Kansas State had the answers. And once Kansas State got going, it looked like this was only going to end one way, and that was with the Wildcats winning. But it took a little while to get there. Mm-hmm. But for this team, right now without your best player, to be 2 games up on every other team that has a number next to them in the Big 12 right now. There are a couple teams that are only 1 game back with 1 loss. But the teams you expect to go challenge Kansas State in this conference, specifically Baylor and Texas, you've got a really, really good opportunity here to win this thing outright. That's a big-time win that you're not expecting to get, especially without Aoka Lee. But they found a way to do it, and if you're Nikki Cullen and Baylor, you're just left wondering what in the world happened in that second half, because they had this game and then all of a sudden they just didn't.
Not to mention that the Bears have now lost 3 of 4 after
Yeah, that
starting the
part too.
season. After start of the season, screaming out of the gates. Um, you lose a couple game, you lose a game to Kansas that wasn't competitive. You lose a close one on the road against Iowa State, and you had this little mini stretch here before you kind of go back and forth in terms of road versus home games. You have this 2-game stretch at home. You're not going to have another one of those until middle of February. Um, you were hoping to go 2-0 there to kind of right the ship, and only being up at halftime, not being able to close it out uh, is is going to hurt a little bit, especially when talking about the Big 12 race.
Yeah, absolutely. It looked like this was maybe the team in the Big 12 heading into conference play, and it has not turned out that way so far, always.
At least not so far. At least not on January 22nd. AP polls. Let's talk about them. Men's AP top 25. 1 and 2 look very similar to the way that they did in last week's AP poll. Number 1, UConn getting 44 first place votes. Purdue getting 17. The other 17, nobody else getting a first place vote here. UConn 1, Purdue 2, North Carolina, Houston, and Tennessee all move up 1 to round out the top 5, with Kansas dropping all the way to 7 after a tough week, and a couple of other big jumps up and large falls down the top 25. Memphis drops 9 spots after their rough week. A couple teams jumping into the top 10, moving up 3, 4, 5 spots. A good amount of movement in this week's AP poll.
Yeah, the big thing that stood out to me was Memphis still in the top 25, but you go from 10 to 19, like you said. The other thing, I understand why, because it's not like they've gotten a bunch of signature victories that are going to really impress voters and make them jump a bunch of teams.
Mm-hmm.
Auburn is playing probably better than any team in the country right now. Maybe outside. I mean, it's them or North Carolina. And somehow they're still in the up to 8. There's something about that baffles me, although I understand why. Just if you're looking at this in terms of how teams are playing and the overall resumes, there's no way Auburn's 8. Auburn is the top 5 team in the country at this moment in time, but they don't necessarily have the signature wins and the.
They're 0-2 in quad 1.
Yeah.
Win a quad 1 game, and then I'll feel sorry for you.
That's fair. And maybe they aren't one of actually the 5 best teams in the country. They are just, I wanted to point this out because they are blowing the doors off everybody they play. Have they played the best teams? We need to see what they look like against the Kentuckys, against the Tennessees. Sure.
They're the only team in the top 30 of the net that doesn't have a quad 1 win.
Yeah. Okay. There's some validity to that. I just felt like the amount of wins they're racking up here, they would have gotten higher, but there are a lot of other teams also racking up quality wins. So just keep an eye on the Tigers.
I suppose it's a question of, all right, you want them to be higher than 8th. Which one of the 7 are you putting them ahead of? And maybe it's just that simple. Maybe there's only 5 spots inside the top 5, and North Carolina is hotter than them right now.
Yes. Oh, the top 3 have to be the top 3. Yeah.
And I suppose, if they weren't ahead of Houston last week, they weren't going to be ahead of them this week, because there would have been a different week to jump them. But at some point, it's going to be inevitable if they keep winning.
Yeah, and it's going to sort itself out because they're going to play the best teams in the SEC, and we're going to figure out exactly how good they are.
Yeah, they go at Alabama, at Mississippi State, and their next 2. Those are 2 top 35 KenPom teams. Get a little bit of a break with a home game against Vanderbilt. No disrespect to the Commodores. Honestly, it's not the most intimidating of SEC schedules in general. You play Alabama twice, but you get Kentucky once at home. You get Tennessee once on the road. So in terms of home and homes, it's not the scariest of schedules. The rest of their away games are Alabama, Mississippi State, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and Missouri. So I mean, it's certainly not easy, but it's it could be worse.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of schedule that can win you an SEC regular season title.
Yeah. Right now, Auburn 5-0, one game ahead of Tennessee, Alabama, and Kentucky, all at 4-1 right now. So that Alabama game coming up later this week is an interesting one for sure.
The last thing I wanted to mention with this poll, shout out New Mexico Lobos.
Sure.
Cracking the top 25. Been high on this team all season. They haven't exactly delivered from start to finish, but they are playing really, really well right now in a good Mountain West. Happy to see them get the top 25. This was the team and the reason that I thought San Diego State wouldn't win the Mountain West. I haven't exactly been proven right in that because Colorado State happened too, but the Lobos are coming. Happy to see it.
Mid-major conferences dominating the bottom 10 of the AP poll right now. 6 of the 10 from 16 to 25 are mid-major teams. That's Dayton, Utah State, Memphis, Florida Atlantic, Colorado State, and New Mexico. There you go. What if I told you that on January 22nd, Memphis was going to be the highest ranked American team and not Florida Atlantic? Would you be stunned by that if I told you that a month and a half ago?
Month and a half ago?
Before the season started. Whichever arbitrary date you want to pick.
Before the season, sure, I would have been pretty surprised. Once Memphis got going, though, it was, and now we're talking about them after losses to USF and Tulane, but once they got
higher than Florida Atlantic.
Yeah, once they got, and rightfully so too. Once they got going, it did not surprise me at all. It was I don't think there's too much between those two teams.
Women's AP top 25. Death taxes in South Carolina at the top, 17-0, rolling all 35 first place votes. UCLA was number 2. They'll stay number 2, of course, but we'll probably see some movement there depending on what happens the rest of the week, but you'd expect maybe some movement there. Colorado sticking at number 3. UCLA jumps 3 spots up to number 2, by the way. Kansas State up 3 spots to number 4. And Iowa goes from 2 to 5 after their loss over the weekend on the road at Ohio State. That's their first loss since the middle of November. So the top 5, South Carolina, UCLA, Colorado, Kansas State, and Iowa. Some movement here on the women's side as well.
You don't see two teams move up 3 spots and end up in the top 5 every day. And then, of course, one of them proceeds to lose on Monday and the other one very nearly loses that same Monday. But Kansas State survives. Ohio State up to 12 after getting that win over Iowa. Also a very strange week for Colorado. We didn't really get to talk about this because of all the other things that happened, but you play both LA schools, you split with them, so you just stay number 3. Reasonable enough. I mean, did what you were supposed to. So there you go. And then the other thing I wanted to mention real quickly here, we did not also get to cover this. Stanford is up at number 6, but more importantly, Tara Vanderveer is now the winningest coach in college basketball, NCAA history, however you want to categorize it. She's a stud, so congratulations
winningest
to her.
Coach like ever, like yes. Regardless of sport, ever.
Yeah, I don't
actually know that for sure. I don't actually know that for sure, but
yeah,
like
maybe
there can't be many.
Yeah,
and I don't know if it's a baseball coach.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a division thing where there's a Division II coach or something.
Sure.
For the purposes of the college basketball conversation, she's the winningest coach of all time. Pretty cool.
Very much so. Very much so. Anything else from the weekend, from today? I believe there's one other coach thing that we should probably mention.
Yeah. End of the Tony Stubblefield era at DePaul. I guess I'm somewhat surprised they pulled the plug during the season. Don't know exactly what you're accomplishing by doing that. This was not going well, to put it kindly.
Mm-hmm.
So the decision itself, you can only expect so much at DePaul, but this was, even for DePaul, a really, really bad season. Getting destroyed by teams. Usually they were at least somewhat competitive and were able to hang in there with some teams and cause at least a little bit of a scare. And it didn't just come off the rails. So no surprise at all this decision was made. It's not like you're fighting for an NCAA tournament or an NIT spot here. So I just kind of assumed it would happen at the end of the season, but you get your head start on the coaching search, I guess. And the question is, who can you convince to take this job right now? So we're going to see what direction they end up going.
I hear people talk about this idea of you can't expect much from DePaul. And like I don't totally understand why it's so hard to win at DePaul. In the middle of Chicago, in a major conference, and some of it's probably, well, there's no on-site practice facility. The building they play in is not on DePaul's campus, and it's not like walking distance, especially, it's not walking distance in any city, but like in a city where you're walking as much as you are in Chicago, and public transportation and that kind of thing. Like it's not easy to get to if you're a student. So there are some of those things, but it's a little bit perplexing how bad this program has been and it's not just Stubblefield.
Right.
I mean, we're going all the way back pretty much to I mean, like pre-2000s. I mean, like Dave Lateo in the mid 2000s, and then Dave Lateo at the end of the 2010s and early in the 2020s. Like neither of those stints were successful, really, and like
They had that one halfway
nobody can really
decent
figure it out.
season.
Nobody
Yeah.
can nobody can figure it out, and it's a little like they've only finished over 500 once since 2007, and it was a 19 and 17 season where they finished 118th at KenPom. So like I know, like I get it, but I also get it more when, like, I don't know, pick it's not like there's and granted, yes, there are Big Ten schools in the area. Yes, there's Illinois. Yes, but it's not like your, UTSA and there's this Texas giant. Like it's not the same. Like it's not the same. And you would think that at some point somebody at DePaul would have figured it out, even if it was for 24 months and they have like a nice little run, even if it's not super long lived, and there's just nothing to be excited about when it comes to that program right now.
That over 500 season was the one where they won all those non-conference games, right?
I think you're right.
They started
They
14 and
were
1 or something, and everybody was excited. One of them ranked.
no, they were 7 and 11 they were 7 and 11
Oh,
in conference play that year.
okay.
Maybe the year they were 16 and 16. The 2019-20 season, they were 12 and 1 entering Big East
There it
play,
is.
and then
Yep.
went 3 and 15
Yeah.
and
Okay.
lost and won their Big East Conference tournament game before the season was canceled, to
Ah,
finish 16 and 16.
okay. Okay. So it was two different. Yeah. Yeah. And that was Dave Widow doing a really good job of even getting to that point. Yeah. I was going to say the same thing you did, that clearly
That was
there
the
are
Charlie
some.
Moore, Paul Reed, Jalen Coleman
Yes.
Lands. Like that's a Romeo Weems. Like
Yeah.
that was a
They were a good team.
respectable basketball team.
Yeah. There's clearly some resource issues, some support issues, because, right, this is not just one person, one series of bad hires. There's something systemic here, and it doesn't completely make sense because of hypothetically what you have available in Chicago and what DePaul basketball has represented historically. And yeah, for the last 2 decades, it just hasn't come close to that. So, got to figure out what the next step is, and it's also not a job that you're probably going to be able to get those A-list candidates for, right? So,
Right.
how do you got to kind of strike gold with the person that's able to turn this thing around, that the other programs who have some more appealing opportunities aren't hiring for whatever reason. It's a tough needle to thread. It's a difficult situation for sure.
Yeah. It's a program with a pretty rich history. I mean, like
Yeah,
they've had really
absolutely.
long stretches of really good basketball, and those stretches are a long time ago. And now the NCAA tournament drought is up to 20 years this year. 2003-4, that was the last time that DePaul was in the NCAA tournament. Anyways,
And it also doesn't help that your neighbors next door, Northwestern, are putting together competent basketball teams, and sometimes competing to make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that probably doesn't help either. All right, that's going to do it for the Under 8 podcast. Monday, January 22nd, just after 11 p.m. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your shows. Follow the Under 8 Pod on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube. We'll be back to talk more college hoops tomorrow night. Until then, take care.